It's how nice. We have a perfect lull to begin the meeting. Unfortunately, we don't have quorum at the moment, so I'm just waiting for another councillor on the Budget Committee to show up and we'll begin. Welcome, everybody. We do now have quorum for the 16th meeting of the Budget Committee. I want to welcome everybody here. We acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. You, of course, can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live, or on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at toronto.ca/council. Are there any declarations of conflict under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Today is the final round of budget deliberations where decisions will be made today. It's our as I said, the 16th meeting. There's 3 items before us. BU 16.1, 2020 property tax rates and related matters. BU 16.2, 2020 capital and operating budgets. And BU 16.3, additional City of Toronto reporting requirements as a result of the Ontario Regulation 286-09 budget matters expenses. What I'm going to propose that we do today, members, is that we will consider the items in agenda order. So the first item will be the item on the property tax rates. What I want to do now is just, we'll begin with that, we'll work our way down, but just want to outline what we're going to be doing with regard to BU 16.2 on the 2020 capital and operating budgets. It'll be similar to last week. We have wrap-up notes. We have some more briefing note requests that have come in. They're distributed on blue paper along with some supplementary reports. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions of staff on these reports and on the briefing notes. Once we have done that, we're going to go again to questions of service groups and the agencies. There is a sheet, I believe, that you have. It's similar to what we've done last week. And that'll be one more opportunity to ask any final questions on anything with regard to the budget. Then after that, we'll be going to speaking and moving motions. I will ask for motions that I plan to be moving to be circulated in advance so that you can review them. And if you have your own motions that you want to circulate, just let the clerk know and they will advance circulate them. And again, if you have any draft or any further motions, please bring them to my attention as soon as possible. Are there any questions on how the morning will be proceeding? Councillor McKelvey.
Just want to clarify, we're going to go through the briefing notes first and then the rundown of the list?
So we are actually
doing it concurrently.
We are going to begin with the first item on the agenda, which is BU 16.1, 2020 property tax rates and related matters. So we're going to actually begin with that item. So what I'll begin is questions of staff on that particular item. Then we'll go into speaking, and then we will dispense of that item. Then we'll go on to 16.2, and then we'll go into the blue, as we did last week. It'll be just similar to last with the blue sheets, and then more questions on the overall operating. That'll be that part. That's part of BU 16.2. We're good? Okay. Let's go on to BU 16.1, 2020 property tax rates and related matters. Are there questions of staff? Councillor Layton.
Yes, just out of curiosity, how many more years do we have on our commercial tax shift?
Through you, Chair, till 2023.
Till 2023. Do we have any idea where our commercial tax sits now in relation to other municipalities in the GTA? Have we done that? Had that look done recently?
So not recently, Councillor, but we do have lower rates.
A lower rate than the rest of. Just correct me if I'm wrong, it was at one point the highest rate, and the idea was we'd bring it down to the average.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor. We'll bring it down to the average.
And so this is provincial policy that's having us do this. What will happen in 2023?
So in 2020, by 2023, the commercial rate will be 2.5% of the residential rate.
And what will the provincial policy say we have to do? Can we return to a sort of 1-to-1 ratio, or?
It has to be 0.5% until you're at 2%. 2 times, sorry.
Okay. Maybe just a question to the chair. Is this the appropriate time to ask about briefing notes as they relate to other revenue tools? Because there was a briefing note in relation to the vacant property homes tax,
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
and that's all right, and the municipal land transfer tax. Okay, so the briefing note is sort of light on details about how we would implement this. How long would it take to implement a tool like that? The vacant property tax tool.
So through the chair, the consultant that we're working with is in actual fact doing a comparison with other jurisdictions. We do know that if we look at the city of Vancouver needed an 18-month runway before any tax could be collected.
And do we know if in the city of Vancouver the amount collected has gone down since it's been initiated?
Through the chair, the amount in Vancouver, the number of residents that are being taxed has gone down, but the amount of revenue has gone up.
How did that work? Did they increase the revenue, the percentage or amount paid by the vacant units?
So through the chair, what ends up happening is the tax is based on a percentage of the assessed value. And so the units assessed value, the mix of the assessed value, I would assume has changed.
Has increased. That's a revenue tool that we actually hope to see would decline in time if the other goals that are set out in your report are achieved, if people start renting out or selling vacant units. What would you propose should be the where the revenue goes for such a tool?
So through the chair, realizing that the purpose of this particular policy is not revenue-based, it's actually to increase the number of units that are in the rental housing market. So to your point that it would be anticipated that if the policy was effective, the revenue tools would go down. That being said, that becomes an unpredictable revenue source and hard to incorporate that revenue source into an operating budget when you have reliable operating costs.
So a reserve would be probably the more appropriate place to put funding like that, correct?
It would decrease the amount of risk, yes.
Okay. Just really quickly, do you have information about how long it would take to implement a vehicle registration fee and what the value and amount might be if we were to implement that?
Through the chair, when we look at the vehicle registration fee, what we have to remember is that we are reliant on the province to actually help implement. So one, we would need partnerships with the province and approval of the province to do that for the collection. So that is an element that's outside of our control, and that in actual fact increases the risk as to whether or not that particular tax would be plausible for the city.
Well, but it's one of the revenue tools as outlined in the City of Toronto Act, correct?
That is correct.
And so you didn't answer the question about how long would it take to implement and how much revenue it could potentially bring in.
So give me a second. I do.
Oh,
And that'll be your last question? Oh,
Rob Hatton is here, and he'll actually help with that question.
that's your last question.
Through the chair, the amount of revenue depends on the rate, but generally speaking, a $100 a year rate brings in about $100 million. And the amount of time to implement, as the CFO mentioned, depends on provincial cooperation. But assuming that the province has retained, and they said they have, the capacity to, or they're programming to do it, it's probably in the order of a minimum of 4 to 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Seeing none. Speakers to the item.
No one's going to talk to the tax rate?
Councillor Layton?
Speak to it. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Budget Chief. You know, I think it took us all of a bit of a shock when the mayor, after, I'm trying to get the number of years, but after 5 years of saying it's sticking to the rate of inflation, we can't do more than the rate of inflation, and then the tune changed. That's not a bad thing. I think those of us that had been encouraging this type of more sustainable and responsible approach to raising revenue by moving stuff under the tax rate instead of lending ourselves money or borrowing from reserves or increasing fees, we had been hoping for this. I think, though, what we've seen, and I think what we're going to see in some of the motions that are coming forward, is we need to look for other sources of revenue. Property tax is the easiest. It's the fastest. It happens in the blink of an eye. But it's not the fairest approach. We know that. It's just seemed to be the one that's the most plausible to pass at City Council. Things like a vacant home tax, again, could be a reliable tool, but it's not going to bring in the amount of money that we think is going to, that's going to solve the structural problems within our budget that only reliable revenue tools can. It's also not the goal, as we heard from the CFO. It's not the goal of that tool. That tool is to try to increase the stock of housing, which we've seen it work elsewhere. It just has a lovely side benefit of a little bit of revenue to go into perhaps some funds. The vehicle registration fee, and we know it's not a popular one, but I'm going to remind everyone what happened after the City of Toronto canceled its vehicle registration fee. The province doubled theirs. Drivers are still paying the same amount. It's just, you know who gets the revenue right now? Doug Ford. Doug Ford is getting the revenue that the city gave up. Almost 100, it wasn't 100 because it wasn't a $100 fee at that point. But it was about 60 to 80 million. We gave up that revenue stream. That revenue stream was worth more than 1% on the property tax bill. It was actually worth more like 2. If we doubled the vehicle registration fee now, it would be 120 million, equivalent to a roughly 4%, 5% tax increase. I think my numbers are all within the correct ballpark at least. A parking levy tax, a commercial parking levy fee would be the same reliable source of revenue that were offered from these other tools, but we've ignored them. We've ignored them, and it's been to the detriment of our city budget. So I applaud the budget chief and the mayor and those who have changed their tune from a strictly inflationary increase to one that realizes and recognizes the importance of having a strong, sustainable budget. But I would ask them to go a little bit further and be a little bit more bold and brave to try to say it's not only about a little bit of money to housing or a lot of money to housing and transit, because we know those holes need more filling, but it's about the general state and health of our overall budget. There is one tool that Councillor Carroll will continue to champion, and as will I, and Budget Chief Crawford, I think, has learned a little bit more about, and that's a municipal sales tax. You know, if we got back the 2 points that Harper took off, $1 billion a year would fund into the City of Toronto. That's a subway stop a year and $500 million for housing, roughly speaking. Again, I'm probably just within an order of magnitude on either end. We have to start thinking with that in mind. So congratulations for being brave enough to take that initial step. But we need the big, bold jump to build the city that we really know that the people of Toronto deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I will speak quickly. Thank you, Councillor Layton. You and I do agree and disagree on certain things, but we always, I think, finally come down to a balanced position on the budget. I'll say very clearly that I think this is a strong and sustainable budget. I'll get into some of my remarks when we get on to the operating side. But with regard to taxes, I have, over the last 6 years, my real focus as the budget chair of the City of Toronto has been to keep taxes as low as possible and to look for every opportunity to find savings, whether it's through efficiencies, modernization, reorganization, doing things differently. That has been my focus, and I know I've been working incredibly hard with the mayor to ensure that we find those opportunities. And those opportunities have been given us the ability to do the kind of investing that we want to see, and we're going to be seeing that at the next item. But making sure that we have healthy reserves, keeping them strong, keeping sure that we have a strong policy on investing the $5 billion that we have, ensuring that we're managing the capital better. Those are the kind of things that I have always focused on. Once I get a sense that we're managing the money well, and from my perspective and the mayor's perspective, that is when I would look at considering the potential of raising revenues or taxes, as I have done with regard to the 1.5% city building fund. But it is really in the work that happens mostly behind the scenes that maybe people aren't necessarily aware of in the general public. But it's that kind of work that's critically important. And that's what, when I'm looking at where I want and feel I need to invest in the city, it's that work that enables me to make those decisions. And some of them are difficult from my perspective in raising taxes. But I do that knowing that we are managing the money well for the citizens, residents of the city. Hence why I'll be supporting the recommendations from staff, which are to keep the property tax at the rate of inflation. And we'll be continuing to do so as I move forward. So on that, again, I want to thank all the staff that have worked incredibly hard on this. And we can get, I guess, to the decision. So all in favor of the recommendations from the CFO and Treasurer? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Okay. Now, on to BU 16.2. So if everybody wants to grab their blue sheets, I will we'll work through. There's not as many as last week, but we have supplementary reports, and we will have a few briefing notes that we'll go to. So beginning with BU 16.2, Ravine Strategy Implementation, Consideration of Capital Work Advancement in the 2020 Budget. Are there questions of staff on this supplementary report? Seeing none, Councillor Layton. We're at 16.2. Yeah, it's a supplementary report. We'll be doing the briefing notes after that. So it's on the blue sheets. Just have a look. We'll work our way through the blue sheets. Okay. Seeing no questions, we'll go on next to BU 16.2, the establishment of the 2020 operating budget for the Human Services Integration Office. And it's a supplementary report that is before us. Councillor Carroll, questions of staff?
Yeah, I have some questions. I know this went through as a staff report, but I need to be walked through it again in the context of now looking at their budgets for the year. I'm wondering if you can tell me the positions that are going to come out of these divisions and go into this, what functions were they fulfilling in the divisions they're leaving? Five positions out of Children's Services, for instance.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the positions that are coming over are caseworker positions, so they were doing frontline phone service positions and online processing of applications in their divisions. They have been lifted and shifted over to our new applications and support center and continue to provide the same functions.
So there will still be, for the time being, there'll be a combination. There'll be people who do just Children's Services casework, and then some people are going to do this new generalist function.
So at the present time, we have skills-based routing, which means the staff who were previously processing Ontario Works applications continue to provide those applications, and we've now processed those applications, and we've now started the process of cross-training people so that they are able to take on the functions from the other divisions, and over time, all of the staff working at the center will be generalists.
So, okay, so that is the intention. That was going to be my next question, if it
Correct.
was to shift them all over. So I noticed that in tests, it's 74. Is that because they're considered the most skilled that they would be able to absorb the other tasks?
In that case,
a
they
lot all
perform
at
slightly
once.
different functions. So for employment and social services, they're actually taking the application in the SAM system, doing the full processing, taking it to initial eligibility, and setting up an appointment in the local area office where they can meet with their caseworker for the first time and do individual service planning. So the transactions they're completing are somewhat more complex, and they were a very distinct application center.
Okay, so in the context of the budget, does all of this, are the dollars being shifted with them, is all of this happening, is there a sort of a go-live moment, or is this gradual, have the dollars been adjusted so that they match the months at which the shift happens, et cetera?
So the project has a phased approach. On December 2nd, we implemented the Application and Support Center. So we are now shifting the funding to support that co-location and create a new unit.
Okay, and the shift happens by the end of the year. Is there a 2021 impact to all of this?
At the present time, based on the current model, my understanding is it would only be cost of living going into 2021.
Okay, and whatever remaining positions need to shift.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions on that supplementary? Okay. So we'll go to section 2 now, briefing notes. These were the notes that were submitted for February 4th, 2020, and I believe there's 8 of them. So we'll begin on the corporate. We have 2 briefing notes, number 4247, through the Office of the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer. They are vacant home tax, report status on 2020 implementation impacts, and briefing note 47, MLTT graduated rates. Are there questions of staff on those 2 briefing notes? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. 42 on the vacant homes tax. I know that we're still waiting for a lot of answers to many of the questions that have been proposed, but I was wondering how a vacant home tax has impacted the availability of homes in places like Vancouver.
So through the chair, we're working with a consultant who's compiling that information, and there is data to show that rental properties the supply of rental properties has improved. However, on the contrary to that, we know that the number of units that are deemed to be vacant in Vancouver has declined. However, they're in a price category that might not be deemed affordable.
So the number of vacant units has declined, but the remaining available units are in an expensive price bracket? Is that what?
Yes, and the reason I can say that is because the amount of vacant home tax generated by the City of Vancouver has gone up, but the number of units has gone down, and that's based on assessed value.
Okay, so would that suggest that the units that were more affordable are flowing into the market and being absorbed and people are renting them?
Through the chair, that is an assumption someone can draw, but there isn't data at this point to demonstrate that.
Okay. Wanted to talk MLTT briefly on the next note, 47. The upper end estimate was $5 million in revenue. I recognize that this is not consistent or predictable because it's very much year to year depending on the number of transactions. Are there any examples from this year's budget where we've been able to actually reallocate excess funds to make one-off investments, for example?
So through the chair, just let me bring you back to how we budget for MLTT. And in the past, what we've done is we've remained consistent with the prior year's experience of MLTT.
Right.
What we did in the 2020 budget is that we took the full amount, and we took about 30 million, and we put that into a reserve. So we are working towards weeding ourselves off of MLTT fully funding operating needs and migrating or shifting towards MLTT being used for capital purposes. So we did put 30 million of our overall MLTT into our capital reserve.
So this year, we were able to bolster the reserves with that, and it might not be new investment, but it's still a significant gain for financial stability.
Yes, and so I just want to add, there is 40 million a year of MLTT that always goes to capital. We've topped that up by an additional 30.
Okay.
So yes, to your question, that we feel that we have signaled that we're moving towards MLTT funding more capital on a go-forward basis.
Right, and that would be those one-off investments.
Could be one-off, yes.
Could be. Okay, very good. That's all my questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, just quickly. So there's a motion we're looking at today that says reduce the contribution to the stabilization reserve of MLTT. Is that out of the 30, or is that because the projection has now been upsized?
Which one?
Which I don't think staff have had the opportunity to, these are motions that just came on the floor, so they probably haven't had an
I'll
opportunity.
remember that, so later you can't say staff wrote this motion.
They haven't had the opportunity to review that, I believe. So hence why it's technically difficult for them to ask a question on something that's not on the floor at this point, even though it's been circulated.
Okay, the only problem with that is that once it is on the floor, I won't be able to go back and ask them a question.
Yep, it's the process.
Okay, so, well, we're probably not going to vote on it until after lunch, so maybe I can ask that question offline, because it's going to be important. The only other question I had, and I'm putting you on the spot, I'm wondering about what is the complexity of doing this if we move to doing this tiered MLTT. If councillors want to move to, houses over 3 million. What is the complexity of it? And given the small amount of revenue, it's not like vacant home tax where it's a disincentive that solves a problem for us. It's just to grab more money, but it doesn't look like it grabs a lot. Is the complexity of the collection such that we really should be looking somewhere else for a revenue tool?
Through the chair, I don't think the complexity of reprogramming the tax is really the central issue here. It would take
Just a software exercise?
pretty much.
Okay. Am I putting staff on the spot to say that it's if council go this way, it's a strategy that staff could recommend?
Well, I think in our note, we suggested there are some considerations.
Yeah.
One is that we're currently harmonized in our rates with the province. We would fall off that approach. By increasing revenue, we would increase marginally budget exposure to a variable revenue. So that's a consideration. And then lastly, as a tax measure, you have to consider that it is a very narrow incidence, very small number of people affected.
Yeah.
And generally, that's not the ideal approach for a tax. However, as a modified aspect of the current tax, it's something the council can certainly consider.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? I do have a few on the vacant home tax for the CFO. So I know some people are disappointed that the report won't be ready till, Councillor, I have a question for the CFO, and actually, that's okay. So these are just a couple of questions on the vacant home tax. So I know some people are disappointed that the report won't be ready till Q2. Would we be missing out on any of the revenue in 2020 as a result of this delay?
So through you, there would not be an opportunity to collect any revenue in 2020, even if we were to implement it today.
And why would that be?
Learning from Vancouver, and again, the consultant has looked at Vancouver as the closest example we have. They took 18 months as a runway to get prepared before they could start collecting tax. And so we would look at what best practices they implemented as well as lessons learned. So I can go into the details as to why 2020 is not feasible, but 2020 there would not be an opportunity to generate any revenue.
Okay. Hence, that was the learning, how we've learned from the implementation for Vancouver of what they've done. Okay. Is it fair to say that this tool is less focused on raising revenue than it is about encouraging homes to be occupied?
Yes, so the purpose of the policy would be to increase the number of affordable rental units. And there, again, we are looking for evidence that indicates that the policy is effective. If the policy is effective, these would be revenues that would decline over time.
So if we move for this policy and we ultimately get no income from that, that's probably the best result we're looking for.
Then that would mean that the policy is effective.
Okay. Do we know if Vancouver's empty homes tax is improving rental prices at all?
There is no indication right now that there is a direct correlation between the vacant home tax and the rental market. That being said, there are other factors that influence the rental housing availability.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next we will.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask one more question about all of the new taxes so that we just get it on the record? I just want to put it out there so that we're thinking of it in these terms. What the consultant told us when we got revenue tools at all, and Mr. Hatton is probably the only person old enough like me to remember this. What Hempson told us is any new tax at all, is this still true? That basically, from legislation to runway to phase, you're not going to see the 12-month amount of that revenue till the third year.
Through the chair, every tax is different. Certainly ones where there's already an existing network to collect it, like we had with vehicle tax and land transfer tax, those ones were relatively quick to implement. Where you have to develop a whole new mechanism of collection and enforcement and compliance, it takes a lot longer. And once a tax is in place, generally speaking, it's annualized value the next year. So, you know, it's not necessarily 3 years, but it can take that long.
But if you're going to give the community any kind of notice and runway, you're into that third year. So what I'm getting at is a lot of people are asking how much does it earn, how much does it earn? We can't add something to the budget this year because we're starting this tax. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll go on to, we have two on community and social services, briefing note number 40 and 41. 40 is the Housing Secretariat, investments in affordable housing. Second, Housing Secretariat and the CFO, the entitled Housing Secretariat, annual costs of fee waivers and property tax exemptions for affordable housing. And I just wanted to, for members, introduce Abigail Bond, who is now the new Housing Secretariat Director. She's now with us. So welcome. So, questions of staff on these two briefing notes? Going once. Abigail may not have her first question at budget. Okay. Next. Going to the agencies, we have three for Toronto Community Housing, number 43, 44, and 45. They are entitled City Funding to Toronto Community Housing Corporation, TCHC Utilities and Other, Budget Line Breakdown, and TCHC incremental spending ward-by-ward information. Are there questions on these briefing notes? Councillor Carroll.
I have one on the ward-by-ward information. Or who's answering that? Oh, hello. It's a purely selfish question. It won't even take you long. You probably didn't even need to bring your binder. In the violence reduction program, targeted across the city, and the amounts vary from ward to ward, but there are a few, including my own, where there's a common amount of 78,000. So that's one officer? Is that basically what that amounts to?
In essence is, Councillor Carroll, you know, what we did when we structured the violence reduction program, we looked at the 10 hot sites, essentially like Toronto Police Services does, and so it works out between the third-party security and our own people. That's the cost allocated to that particular ward. It might not exactly be an FTE, but that's the allocation of the numbers.
Okay, so, and I'm going to assume that the proposal here is based on need and incident reports and that for the year. Within the TCHC budget that you do with the board, is this now, there's a gross amount for this that's almost 5 million, and it will shift from year to year, or would, if you were going to do any more work here, would it have to be new and enhanced, and we'd have to go through that rigmarole in years?
I think the circumstances will direct what would happen in the future. You know, before it could shift, we would have to see, you know, a stabilization or a reduction in a community to say we can actually pull resources away from a violence reduction program. So that I think that, and I think I'm answering your question.
Yeah, sort of. Well, I'll come right at what I'm getting at is mine could be seen as kind of low based on what's happening right now, but I'm not going to fuss about it because currently I have 2 complexes that are under revitalization, and knock wood, okay. But if once the residents are all moved back, if a problem emerged, would the board address that, or would they have to come to the city looking for more resources?
Not necessarily. I mean, certainly first the staff in the company would look at it, and we would work with our operations team and our CSU team to say, how can we solve this particular issue? It may be something as simple as increasing patrols in the area. It may require something that is of a higher nature. That would require a full-time presence. And so to some degree, it would depend on what the circumstances are.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. You've designed it so the envelope has a little flexibility.
We have flexibility in it, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, thanks.
So just on that ward to ward, I'm just wondering where Ward 5 is.
Roseanne, do you want to speak to that?
Which is my ward.
Yeah.
It's not even included.
It may in fact be in terms of where the 10 priority sites were, that there weren't units coming into Ward 5. I have to assume, you know, since we've done this ward breakdown and it doesn't have every ward in it, that in fact there wasn't anything in terms of where the threshold cut line was for Ward 5.
So nothing in Ward 5. Is that what you're saying?
And by the way, this to be clear is incremental spending. So for example, if you were thinking of Falstaff,
right,
we've already made that investment in Falstaff. So perhaps maybe that is the confusion. This isn't the total spend in the ward. This is the incremental spend, and we've already invested.
You've already spent it,
right.
And so it's not. So we're not going to spend any more.
No, we've already kind of allocated. We've got the resources, and we're actually got CSU dedicated to that area in the evening hours and to the early morning.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor, I believe Councillor Fletcher, did you have some? Okay, she got her questions answered. Okay. We'll go on to the final briefing note, which is number 46 from the Toronto Transit Commission, breakdown of proposed additional vehicles in the Toronto Transit Commission's 2020 to 2029 capital budget and plan. We have questions from Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if anybody's here to answer them, though.
They're behind you.
Hi. Okay. So my question is about the buses. So there is 614 proposed here, of which 249 are hybrid electric and 365 are electric. So I just want to confirm, firstly, the remaining 961 that are not yet funded, will those be electric?
Through the chair, most will be electric, but not all. There are some hybrids in that number as well.
What is the lifespan of a hybrid electric bus?
12 years. We typically keep them for 13.
And I know we're going to be getting a report back on procurement, but what is the last day that we would be buying a hybrid electric bus?
The board approved in June of 2018 a target date of 2025 to procure only electric buses thereafter.
And are we on track for that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so then 2025, add 12 in case you bought some, say, in 2024, you would have all the hybrid electric off by like 2036?
That's right. So it's 2037 so it's 3 years roughly ahead of the 2040 target date for all electric fleet.
Okay. And then are you also in parallel looking at ways you may be able to advance to go straight to electric?
We're not currently looking at that. We are looking at implementing the plan approved by the board in 2018.
Okay. And then for the hybrids, what is the fuel source?
The fuel source is diesel. It has onboard batteries and it's powered by an electric motor. So it is roughly 37% to 47% more fuel efficient, and therefore reduces the GHG emissions by about that amount as well.
And are there options for that to be biodiesel as opposed to diesel?
We currently use biodiesel in all of our fleets.
Okay.
So the city is looking at increasing the percentage of biodiesel. We've tested our fleet to ensure that it could accommodate the higher ratio. And we're open to that when the city makes that available through the fuel contract.
Okay, so in parallel to bringing online the electric vehicles, you are also remaining vehicles shifting from diesel to biodiesel so that you could be net zero well in advance of 2040 if all goes according to plan then?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So now we're going to go to last opportunity for questions of staff, broken down into the different service groups and agencies, similar to last week. So let's begin with community and social services. That includes children's services, economic development and culture, housing secretariat, TAS, Toronto paramedics, parks, forestry, shelter, support and housing, court services, senior services, and SDFA. Any final questions on, I think you should have a copy in front of you, but it's same as last week. I know there's lots of paper in front of you right now. Councillor Layton.
Just on the children's services, I need to clarify two numbers that have come up before. What is the total amount of money that needs to be budgeted in 2020 to maintain our ratio of subsidies to childcare spots?
The total amount is 15 million.
So that's what we would have to invest this year.
That's correct.
Now, before the provincial change, how much money would that have been?
Before the provincial change was essentially a reduction of 15 million, which is why we need the 15 million to stay on track.
But 12 million of that is being offset by the province this year.
That's correct.
So again, I'm just, because if 12 million is offset, then what would we actually need this year to maintain the 40% ratio?
The 12 million is a one-time commitment for a different funding envelope. It can be used for fee subsidies, but in terms of growth, so it will help us sustain and continue as we are, but in terms of achieving growth, would require the 15 million.
So it still requires 15 in order for us to achieve
Growth,
40%.
yes.
And what percentage, had the province not taken away that 15 million, what would have been the city's contribution to maintain the growth?
The city's contribution, their 20% would have been approximately 3 million.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
So I think I asked this question in wrap up, not final wrap up, but you're going to have to refresh my memory. Yeah, because it was 3 million, 2.8 million we talked about. If we were to move a motion to add it, if we found a source of revenue, we moved a motion to add the 3 million, you would have places where you could allocate subsidies between now and the end of the year in existing centers?
Through the chair, Councillor Carroll, right now we do have a challenge in that the capital projects are slow to be delivered.
Right.
And
That's
those
part of the
spaces, right, those spaces are opening slowly and incrementally. The biggest pressure will be in the third quarter when we expect most of those centers to start opening. So right now, currently, until those new spaces open, it's a challenge for families. We can allocate them a fee subsidy, but they're having difficulty finding a space.
And if we did that this year, then there would be, if we don't end up coming to some sort of agreement that we should continue this program with the province, there would be a problem next year. We would have to cumulatively cover that and then some. Am I right?
That's correct. The pressure will be in future years. As those new spaces open, then there will be a pressure for more fee subsidies and operating funding.
Okay, so we're actually better off moving a motion. Perhaps we're better off moving a motion not to just add the subsidies right now because you couldn't really use them until the final quarter and that it's still an if. But if we were to move that for 2021, that we wanted to know how many subsidies you needed in new centers and to keep us on track for the growth. You could propose an amount that would really fulfill the growth next year, plus add some to keep pace with the strategy, do a sort of 2-year top-up. Would it be more implementable if we waited till 2021 to do that?
Through the chair, yes, I think it would be. By that point, we will have those new centers opening. We have our projected 10-year capital plan. So, in fact, as part of our budget every year, we do look at the number of spaces that will come on throughout the year and the timing of those. So that is part of our planning process. So we would be happy to include that assessment in our 2021 budget. As I said, the bulk of the new spaces are going to be delivered towards the end of this year and into 2021 and 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, so just on the 50 million, so we learned that if the city was to continue on the previous path of childcare expansions, 15 million. So if we do that, what would how would that look? What would the chances of us being in lobbying the provincial and federal government for funding if we go ahead and fund it without asking the province and the Fed to fund it, the 15 million? Okay, it wouldn't look good for us if we just went ahead and not asking who should be funding daycare for the funding, correct?
Through the chair, we have been very clear, both the division, the city manager's office, have been very clear with the province that in order to grow, that we need to rely on continued investment from both them and the federal government. So, we're very clear on that. The province is currently reviewing its funding formula this year. and we're awaiting information on that and their new childcare plan to see if that's going to provide some new increased provincial investments.
So what would be appropriate at this time is to convey to the provincial and federal government for the commitment of the future funding at this point. So we do have an opportunity to get that funding.
Through the chair, that's correct. I think we could reconfirm
Yeah.
the city's commitment when the provincial and federal governments commit to growth and expansion. The city has already committed to be a part of that, but they can certainly not bear the full burden.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, let's go on next to infrastructure. Oh, sorry. I did have a question with regard to the Cabbagetown Youth Center. So I understand there was a briefing note request, and just repeating, for $350,000 in emergency funding. So are staff reviewing documents provided by the CYC to better understand what the needs and the debts of this organization are?
Yes, we are.
I would assume it would be premature to, at this point, to ask for or put funds until we get a sense of what it needs to be going towards?
Staff do have an analysis about what council, how much council could provide to the organization should council decide to provide emergency operational funds.
So a motion from us would be helpful for council.
If you would like to better understand that analysis, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no other questions. Let's go on to infrastructure and development services. Are there questions on infrastructure? That's city planning, MLS, Toronto Fire, Transportation, Engineering, Construction, Office of Emergency Management?
My apologies. Was that the questions on the whole cluster? Or were you?
Yeah, so we're actually doing on the whole cluster now.
Okay.
Did you have questions of the previous one?
I had questions of the previous cluster around the eviction prevention.
Okay, why don't we, I can jump back to that. So,
Thank you.
okay.
It'll
Councillor
be
Layton?
very quick. It's just the effectiveness of the eviction prevention. If I remember this correctly, it was a recommendation from an inquiry that then resulted in a business case that said this is a good investment, that, if I remember correctly, pays 3 to 1. How did it not end up in the budget?
Councillor, I think when we were analyzing our budget with the significant unfunded pressure from the refugees, we felt at this time we will continue the existing program, so we'll continue to use the funding that we have to help families that are at risk of eviction. But at this point, we didn't want to expand the program until we had a better sense of the stability we would have in our budget.
In your view, does eviction prevention help ease the pressure in our shelter system?
Yes, it certainly helps with the inflow, but that is also our issue around the refugees, also contributing to inflow. But yes, we want to turn our mind to managing inflow and expediting outflow as the real solving of the pressure in the shelter system.
And when you say it pays 3 to 1, what do you mean?
So it is avoiding people becoming homeless. It is also the increased cost of rehousing people. So they often lose all of their belongings and stay in our shelter programs for a period of time at a greater cost than it would be for us to maintain them in their housing.
Now, it's $5 million, and there's several staff positions, but not $5 million worth. So what does the rest of the money go to?
We fund both housing allowances so that if it's a financial need that the family has, that we can assist them in maintaining their rent or relocating the family to another unit and helping them with their rent. We also have a prevention fund, so if the reason for the eviction is that they've fallen into arrears, they can access some money to assist them get out of those arrears and maintain the relationship with their landlord.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think Councillor Carroll wanted to jump back into community and social services, so we'll do one more quick round of that, but I don't think there's any more, so just, I will
Okay.
acknowledge Councillor Carroll.
It's just, we didn't ask any parks questions. It's actually a recreation question. I'm wondering if you could walk us through the mayor's announcement, adding youth centers at this point. What will be the staffing of them? And then I have a follow-up question, but first if I could hear the staffing.
Through the chair, so the model includes one full-time youth recreation programmer per location. So each site would have a dedicated full-time staff as well as the required part-time staff to provide the up to 7-day per week programming and supervision, as well as a supervisor that would provide leadership for that team of additional programmers hired.
A supervisor per site, or they'll supervise a group of sites?
Yeah, so it'd be one supervisor for the 10 sites once fully ramped up.
Okay, so that makes more sense, because we were trying to figure out the math yesterday. I noticed you saying youth programmer and part-timer. What are we doing about outreach? I notice you're not saying youth outreach worker.
Through the chair, the youth outreach worker program, we have 31 youth outreach workers across the city. That program was not being expanded as part of the enhanced use space sites, but there is obvious synergies between the youth outreach workers and the enhanced use spaces in terms of making contacts with youth out in community, referring them into the programming. And we have youth outreach workers situated geographically in many of the sites that we're considering for these spaces.
Okay, and you're confident that the model we're setting up here and the expansion of sites, that they'll have time to do the actual outreach?
I am confident, yes.
Okay. So then my only other question is this. How many youth centers, including the new ones, but how many youth centers in total can actually be open 8 hours a day, both weekend days?
Of the spaces that we're looking at expanding?
No, of all of them. How many youth centers in Toronto will be open 8 hours Saturday and 8 hours Sunday?
That is the model. So all of the current 10 enhanced use spaces that we have are open up to 7 days a week. They're not necessarily open 8 hours per day. They have varying hours. Their primary hours are after school, into the evening, weekend days, and then daytime access is either through partnership, use of spaces, or some direct programming for youth that aren't in school. That essentially, as soon as the youth recreation programmer is hired, youth advisory council is established at the location to co-design programming, we're ready to go. And then the part-time staff fill in for hours that the YRP isn't on site.
So I lied. I have one more question. I said it was one more. Just one last. If you had the resources in future years, would these centers be more effective if you had enough staffing that, similar to being there for folks after school in the evening, if youth could know that for at least 8 hours, both weekend days, those centers were going to be open? If there was, similar to the open hours proposal in library, if there was a community center open hours program for youth centers, could we greatly improve this program?
I think we could always look at how to enhance the service. I think one of the things we'd want to look at is talking to the youth about what the gap is or perceived gap in available hours. Community centers themselves are open far past the enhanced use spaces necessarily, and there's lots of other complementary opportunities for youth to recreate, whether it's drop-in programming in our centers that are open in some cases till 10 or 11 o'clock at night and full day weekend. So I think the idea of the enhanced use spaces is to try and complement the community center hours by providing the full-time supervision in those spaces and really provide that wraparound recreational opportunity and social development leadership for those youth.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Councillor, we'll go to Councillor Nunziata. I think Councillor McKelvey has more questions.
So Just going back to the hours of the community centers. So in Falstaff, for example, we, working with the youth, we asked that the hours be extended, which we did, which is working very well. I mean, we're open later in the day and then opening, I believe, to 9 at night. So that's working well, and that's, I think that's achievable, correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so, so the mayor announced $6 million in funding for youth and crime services yesterday. Would that funding be focused on investing in organizations that support youth in partnership with some of our organizations that are working with youth?
To the chair, that announcement is the $2.1 million is for a new community youth grant program that is actually modeled off of the one that we developed with you, Councillor, for Falstaff. So it would be working with young people and agencies in communities across the city to do something very similar.
Right, for example, Frontlines, and correct?
We need to amend the program design that we developed with you to make sure that it's appropriate for communities across the city, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you. This question is for shelter support and housing. I don't know where. Oh, hello. Okay. Can you just let me know about a little bit more about the eviction prevention in the community program? So specifically, are you making any recommendations about incarcerated individuals and how to deal with that?
Yes, so we are looking at how to expand our program to include that. We'll look at that when we are able to expand our program. But we work with any client that is experiencing an eviction. So specifically engaging that group would be something that we would look to when we do expand the program.
Okay. And can you just walk through, in addition to EPIC, like what are the other sorts of services that are being provided by the city around this issue?
Around eviction prevention?
Yeah.
So we have a number of things that we fund. We fund the rent bank, which also provides one-time low-interest loans to people who are in arrears. We also fund housing help centers. So anyone in the community that's either looking for housing or needs support in housing, they can access that in their community. We also fund a tenant hotline for tenants experiencing difficulty with their landlord, where they can find out what their rights are as a tenant. And we also provide a grant program for tenants that are facing above guideline rent increases, for them to hire a paralegal to represent them at the tenant landlord.
And how are all of these services promoted? Is there like a central place where people can go and get information about all of the programs together? And in particular, if it's expanded to incarcerated individuals, like how would you promote that?
So we would use a variety of methods, obviously electronically on our website, but a lot of our promotion is done through our partners in the community. We have contracts with over 200 agencies out in the community, so through their expanded networks, we would make sure that we got those messages out to people who would be eligible for those programs.
And what is, like, how do you interface with the city's housing stabilization fund? So what is the interface with that, with these programs?
Yes, so we work closely with our partners in Toronto Employment and Social Services. So if one person has accessed the Housing Stabilization Fund and they're not able to access it, we have also support through the Furniture Bank if they need to access furniture and they're not able to do that through the Housing Stabilization Fund. We can help them out with that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fletcher, you had a question?
Yes, I just wondered that you were mentioning about the rent bank and eviction. Do you have quantified the number of, let's say in 2019, the number of people that were maintained in their homes, or the number of people that were helped with first and last month's rent?
So we do know that through the EPIC program, we maintained 433 households in their housing. I don't know if we then added that to all of the other programs off the top of my head, how much that number would add to, but I can certainly get you that information.
And when it says maintained in their housing, that's by helping them with rent to get through a tough time?
It can be a variety of things. It can be working with the landlord to mitigate any issues in the breakdown of a relationship, taking care of arrears, dealing with hoarding or pest issues. So it can be a variety of supports that we provide.
Is that through Spider or through you?
That's through us, but we also do make referrals to the Spider table if people have particularly complicated cases.
Now, I know at times, and people that are, let's say, they're not being reno-evicted, but it's a planning application and there's a change of use. Is that a service that the city offers, or is that done through, let's say, Wood Green, as it's done in my area?
Thank you for reminding me of that, Councillor. Yes. When we receive information about tenants that are being evicted with very short notice, we do fund a service through Wood Green that provides housing support and emergency hotel support for those tenants until they can be rehoused.
So are we looking at adding more staff to do some of those things, or to assist the kind of robust community that is assisting tenants already?
We have not included any increases to that service in 2020.
And how about the tenant hotline and FMTA that is supposed to help tenants? Are you able to, with any of those dollars, increase their capacity?
No, we have not. We've maintained those existing budgets in 2020.
And the renovictions is not under your division at the moment. It's under the Housing Secretariat doing that work. Are there any staff contemplated from this being able to work on renoviction issues, including tenant rights and assisting people to understand their rights in a renoviction?
Through the chair, the Housing Secretariat was directed to bring a report to the Planning and Housing Committee in June, outlining our staffing requirements to deliver the plan over the next 10 years. So at that point, through consultation with SSHA and other divisions, we will bring a recommendation forward to the committee.
But I think I'm just asking SSHA if any of those 5 positions would be considered for renoviction prevention. Or could be considered for that?
We have not at this point, but it is something we can look at. We have parameters on the program at the moment, but with an expansion, we would be revisiting those parameters.
And so for that, what is it, how much? 2.1?
Yes, that's right.
So staffing costs versus other costs in that? Could you break those down for me, please?
Councillor, it'll just take me a moment to get that information.
Okay. I have 45 seconds left.
It's on hold.
Oh, thank you.
So the staffing cost is about half of that amount, and then half of that amount would go to supporting the housing allowances and the prevention fund.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll go on to Infrastructure and Development Services. Questions of that group? I think we're okay on that. So we're going to go to Corporate Services. That's Environment and Energy, IT, 311, Corporate Real Estate Management, Fleet Services. Are there questions of staff? Okay, we'll go to Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is about the resilience strategy. So you've spoken about Transform TO and the additional positions that are coming in for that. how many of those positions are dedicated to the resilience strategy? So on the one hand, I think this is great that we're starting to look at resilience in everything that we do in all departments, but yet we still do need to have like that coordinating presence in the city. So how many FTEs from that will be allocated to the resilience strategy, and when will we see those online?
Of the 13 new positions as part of the climate emergency declaration, 4 of those are allocated to resilience. We are working on defining the job descriptions now, and we should see those on board in June.
And how are you establishing them to work cross-departmental and like across the city? Like, I know they're housed in your department. Like, are they housed in your department? Like, how do you see that working?
City, we already have, and through the chair, we already have a resilient city working group. And, you know, that's the starting point for this. We have a group from most of the divisions that are, for which resilience is an issue, already talking to each other. So we're well up that curve.
Okay, and then you are reporting back on Transform TO in the spring on the action plan for 2021 to 2023.
Correct.
And in that action plan, do you see that there are actions that you would be immediately wanting to implement this year, or really is it next year in it's truly 2021?
The action plan that we will bring forth talks about 2020 and 2021.
And within 2020, are you really foreseeing, because you're ramping up to 18 new FTEs, which is a considerable amount of work, like what other actions do you foresee coming that would require funding, for example?
The work program we have in 2020 is both internal and external. So I think the move to create CREM has changed the focus for funding of internal projects over to the CREM group, and we continue to work with them. We are also focused quite extensively on external projects. And we've been, you know, when you look around the city, we've been pretty successful in working with the private sector to develop initiatives that are in support of Transform TO.
So in the action plan that comes back with any initiatives that are proposed for 2020, are you expecting that they would be fully scoped and costed at that time so we could make a decision on in-year adjustments or changes?
Yes.
Okay, and then my question is for the CFO. Is there the opportunity for, what are the opportunities for in-year adjustments and funding?
Through the chair, so in the past, there have been in-year adjustments. Typically, when there are, we identify sources of funding so that there is, obviously, we have to have a balanced budget. So we have to actually wait and see what the magnitude of that is and whether or not the funding sources are external in the sense of partnerships or whether or not they're internal in the sense of potential savings that have been identified.
Okay, so it wouldn't necessarily mean that there's an increase in the over budget for the year, but you may be able to do an in-year adjustment where things are maybe not as advanced as you thought and shift funds through a mechanism like that?
Yes, so through the chair, our budgets have to remain balanced, so we have to identify the funding source. So if we are going to increase expenditures, we have to identify where that offset's going to come from.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you very much. After the budget's passed, how long does it take to get new FTEs in seats?
It depends on the starting point. So right now, prior to the budget being approved, we're already working on the job descriptions. So again, we're already working on that. But our experience from 2 years ago when we had a significant increase is that June-ish, July-ish.
So really the first year, we don't have people actually working on files until about halfway through the year.
Correct. And when you look at the budget numbers, the dollars, they represent 7 months of funding for those positions that we've identified.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just quickly, just 2 from myself. So we have a plan that is coming forward. When was the plan coming forward again?
There are 2 plans coming forward this year. The first one basically takes us through 2020 and 2021. That was underway prior to the creation of the climate emergency. One of the initiatives from the climate emergency declaration will be the creation of a net zero plan, and that will come in Q4. So the 2020-2021 plan in Q2 and Q4 will be the net zero plan.
So just a question to the CFO then. There will be an opportunity, I think you're just repeating a question that was just asked, that there will be an opportunity to fund the 2021 to 23 action plan if approved by council in the spring? And it's talking about in-year potential adjustments.
So again, just want to reiterate, depending on what the request is, and I have not seen that, the intention is the plans that they bring forward that we would be able to identify offsets.
Okay, so you do have to do offsets. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, next we'll go to Finance and Treasury Services, Office of the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer, Financial Services, and Office of the Controller. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the other category, which is the City Manager's Office, Legal Services, City Clerk's Office, City Councilor, and Office of the Mayor. Councillor Layton.
I would ask just what it would take to keep Yulie Watkis in her job for another term of council, but maybe that's a rhetorical question.
I'd gladly move that motion. Okay, next, accountability officers. Questions of the accountability officer.
I have questions of...
Oh, sorry, Councillor, you had questions?
For accountability officers.
Oh, yeah, okay. So accountability officers. Do we have the, I saw the AG here. Are the other accountability
My questions are actually for the lobbyist registrar and the integrity commissioner.
Okay, and I'm just seeing if they are in the room.
We can call them and tell them to come.
Why don't we go through the agencies and we can...
Yeah, okay, why don't, so we do have questions of the accountability officers, so we'll, I think some of them are here, or a few of them are here. We'll try to get them. So here's a question. Do we have questions for the Auditor General? I think we do. Integrity Commissioner, are there, we're just, I think we're going to just see, do we have questions of the Integrity Commissioner? No. The Lobbyist Registrar, do we have questions?
I have questions of the lobby.
Okay, so the lobbyist, and do we have the ombudsman?
Yeah.
We do have questions. Okay, so there's no, just want to clear it, there's no questions for the Integrity Commissioner? Okay, so I don't think we need to require or ask the Integrity Commissioner to come. So why don't we, and I think, why don't we do the questions of the Auditor General, who's already here? Okay, now who had questions of the AG? Councillor Fletcher, did you have, Councillor Fletcher? We have the Auditor General here for questions. Okay, who had questions?
I'll ask her a question though, since she sat down.
Okay, well, there we that would be nice.
Yeah.
Councillor McKelvey.
My question was just, what is the length of your term?
The length of my term is 7 years, and I finish December 2021. So I have less than 2 years left.
Okay, I thought it was sooner, and I was very sad, so I'm happy to hear it's 2 more years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we, with the lobbyist registrar and the ombudsman, let's just hold that down. We'll do the age, I think we'll get them into the room. Okay, next we'll go on to agencies. There's a long list of all the agencies. Are there questions of agencies? Councillor Layton? Oh, I'm sorry. We're now into the questions of agencies. So that's all the agencies. They're listed there.
I have questions of the public library.
Okay. So why don't we begin with Councillor Layton on the public library? I just want to make sure the staff are close for...
Thank you very much. Some original questions were brought up earlier by Councillor Carroll with Parks, Forestry, and Recreation about the usefulness. Sorry, I'll let you get comfortable. Just perhaps not speak so quickly. Just on questioning the usefulness of the youth hubs versus extended hours. Could you enlighten us as to what you think the most effective means of engaging the communities, particularly youth, would be in the case of the public library? Is it youth hubs or is it extended hours? Or do you have a magic formula of the two?
Ideally, you should have both, but anyways.
That's actually a fine answer. We can just end it there.
Youth hubs are obviously more targeted. The capacity is in a smaller room, and it's the funding of them is less because the locations are lower. We're proposing with this addition to have 23 youth hubs across the city when we have 100 branches. So obviously it is a targeted issue, and we focus them in neighborhood improvement areas, and we are providing enough support in the youth hubs for those youth. Open Hours Plan is a comprehensive plan across the city to expand hours in 80 branches. And it obviously would impact way more people in way more neighborhoods. So youth hubs are great, and but they're targeted, and it's limited, although they form a very important function for youth safety and community safety.
So does the library board have a position on expanding the hours versus the youth hubs? Have they made known their preference?
They somewhat go hand in hand. For example, some of the youth hubs are not open every night of the week. So our open hours plan allows those branches with youth hubs to be open every night of the week. So they do supplement each other. Again, it's one is more targeted and one is more general, but they both form a very important function. And it depends on kind of what the current focus is based on limited resources, how we want to target the resources.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
So the board is pretty passionate about their open hour strategy, though. So let me ask you this. The 23 centers, was that the ultimate goal? When they said we want to have youth hubs too, we think we have something to offer, was that the goal, to be in about 25% of branches?
So in the listing we provided to our board and we provided to councillors, there's actually 5 more youth hubs on the list. But because we have capital projects that are planned for those branches in the future, it would make more sense to just build them into those capital projects at the youth hubs at the time and just get them all done at the same time. And so we put them as a kind of more forward-looking listing.
Right. So ultimately, we'd be looking then at about a third of the branches having youth centers, but youth programming in the others as well.
Exactly. We do youth programming in all our branches. The youth hubs just focus a lot more on dedicated staff who do after-school homework help and other kind of mentoring activities.
Right. So the question is this. Full disclosure, I'm not on the library board, but I'm a fan of the open hour strategy as well. You're being offered by the mayor's announcements 8 new centers, but given the board's deliberation, the board actually, I understand, passed a resolution to continue to demand the support so that they could make a start at the open hour strategy rather than dribs and drabs to tackle it the way the strategy was designed. If we took the dollars that are coming to you for 8 youth centers and did a combination of those two things, would it be possible financially for you to divide it up? Could you apply the dollars in sort of precise amounts? Is there a component of open hours where you could do some open hours and open 5 centers or some combination thereof, so that we would be meeting the board's resolution and addressing youth?
There is one possible strategy. Instead of taking the whole $2 million or $1.8 million and putting it all to youth hubs, we could possibly open the youth hubs a little bit later in the year, take some of that money and fund some of the open hours associated with those branches with the youth hubs and use the same funding envelope. The impact, though, is in the second year, you'd have a greater financial impact. and that's
What
the
you just
drawback.
described also makes the youth hubs that are opening more effective. They'd be open longer hours.
Exactly. It is exactly because those youth hubs would have longer hours and it'd be more open more evenings, and you'd then achieve some open hours as well as the youth house, but you would have a bigger pressure in the following year. So it's a different way of funding, and it's a little bit more expensive over 2 years.
So last question, she asked, knowing the answer to it, are there youth hubs where at an early hour, because the branch is closing activities because they're not open that late, they literally have to hustle the kids out of there? The room is still full of kids and they have to say, okay, wrap it up.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor McKelvey, then Nunziata.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're discussing the merits of youth hubs or open hours or all these things, and that's great that we're talking about this around this table, but what community engagement and sort of discussions have you had with the actual people that are using these spaces to see what their preference is? Because I'd rather hear from them. So what kind of community engagement have you done along the issues of youth hubs and open hours?
Well, we've just gone through extensive community engagement throughout last year. As we formulated our new strategic plan, we consulted with everyone of all different types of users. And we did an extensive consultation with both external as well as internal partners, as well as our customers. Overwhelmingly, we heard that there's a great need for additional hours in the branches, but we've also engaged the Youth Hub participants in seeing how the outcome is there. And we have many metrics from dealing with the Youth Hub participants, and we have some of the stats are 94% really appreciate the Youth Hubs. 90% of youth agree they feel safe and relaxed in the hub, and so on. So when we speak to the people who go to the youth hubs, we get very favorable responses from them because they're youth also and they're looking for youth spaces. So we get all our responses are we want more hours, we want more services, and the services include youth hubs. So we do have a lot of stats and anecdotal evidence and responses to our questions supporting both.
So given the very favorable responses that you have around youth hubs, is that the basis for the recommendation to expand on those youth hubs so that we're reaching other areas and reaching new youth and going into other areas that don't have those services available? So it gets broader reach overall?
Definitely.
Thank you.
Councillor Nunziata.
Yeah, so the issue is not extending hours. In the libraries where we have youth hubs, the youth are accessing the libraries later in the day, in the evening. That's when the youth want to be in a youth hub. Am I not correct?
Yes.
Right. It's not at 9 o'clock in the morning.
The youth hubs generally start at
It's in the later part of the
3
day.
till 7:30
Right.
or 8:30.
So in these libraries where you have youth hubs, rather than opening in the morning, why not open later in the day and extend the hours for the youth hub, which is where they want to be in the evening, not in the morning?
Because our customers are varied. We have seniors and caregivers who come to the libraries in the morning. If you take away mornings, then you've disadvantaged.
I'm just talking about the ones that have the youth hubs.
Those also have customers who are elderly and caregivers.
Well,
So-
okay, well, I'd really like to see stats on that.
We have stats of.
Well, I like to see every library, yeah.
We have those stats. We've provided it before, and we'll provide it again if that's what you want.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Are there any other questions? Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just a question of clarification. When was the open hours plan originally developed?
It was approved by the board in 2006.
Oh, six.
Six, yeah. It was, and since then, we've managed to actually make significant progress on the original plan. We've achieved 30% of the plan, mainly through reinvesting of efficiencies, through opening two new branches, as well as getting additional funding for Sundays through the the poverty reduction strategy. So it's been a multi-pronged approach, although most of the advancement have been made through efficiencies. So we've achieved 30%. The remaining 70% of the plan is what we updated in 2018, and that's a cost of $18.3 million, which is a 10% increase to our net budget, and it would return a 20% increase in service, which is effectively doubling the return on investment.
So we're increasing it a lot right now. Like you just said, what did you say, 10.3? Is that the number you said, million? I guess I'm wondering, so 2006, 14 years ago, the plan was developed and we've implemented 30%?
Exactly.
Is that, so that's like, we're happy with that? Or, sure. I guess, but we're making the investments now. Did it just get off to a slow start?
The board
14 years ago, or?
The board put through as part of the 2019 budget. We put through a request that wasn't accepted. As part of the 2020 budget, we included phases 1 and 2 of the 3 phases, and that wasn't approved also. Is there the need? Is what the board bringing forward now an acceleration effort because for the previous 14 years or 10 years or whatever, not a lot was done on that? In the first... I guess I'm trying to understand how it goes from 2006, 14 years later, 30%, putting more money into it now than has ever historically been done, but... I think if you look at the history of the budget over the last 10 years, it's been a fiscal restraint budget. It's been... there wasn't much room to be asking for significant investment in the libraries. The focus was on finding efficiencies, cutting costs, keeping the budget low. Even though in like 2006, 2007, 2008? We made some progress there, yes. Okay. Thanks very much, appreciate it.
Any other questions? I just have sorry, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. You are reviewing the pilot for the staffless libraries, are you not?
Yes.
Are you including any incidents in their concerns around safety or anything else in that review?
Yes, we're reporting on everything, and it'll come back to the board shortly.
And if there are incidents that show that, let's say, a kid got locked in there by themselves, et cetera, you may recommend to go back to have an actual person in there. Am I right or wrong?
There was never any staff in the branches ever. What has happened is those branches have 28 hours of service that are staffed. All we did was extend the hours beyond the 28 hours, left the door so that you could fob in and fob out, and there's no staff in there. So we're not introducing staffless libraries. We're extending hours to the public.
Without staff?
Without staff.
Correct. So you're going to report on any incidents that may have happened?
Exactly, and we haven't,
Okay,
it's
that's
been
fine.
a very good experience so far.
I hear you. We'll have that conversation with your report. And then these 23 youth hubs are in priority areas. I'm just going to ask Mr. Oops, where is he gone? Howie Dayton. Did he leave? Recreation staff. His binder is still there. Well, I don't think so, because it's got to do with the number of youth outreach workers that would be as well in those neighborhoods where we have the 23 youth hubs. Have you done that mapping?
Sorry, say that again?
Sorry. The Recreation Division has youth outreach workers, and they're primarily in priority neighborhoods. Have you done any mapping that shows where the hubs are, what other youth-oriented city workers there are in those same neighborhoods?
Yes, that's been a deliberate effort, and we were instructed to do that before, so we're aware of all the PFNR's youth spaces and how the library's youth hubs align with them.
I'm just talking about staff that may not have a space, they may have a community center. Are those staff aligned? And I don't think you can answer that because I don't think Mr. Robbins knows about that. So that is, and have there been any incidents in any of the youth hubs that you are worried about in any way?
I would say when you get a bunch of young people together after school, they tend to be rowdy. And so, of course, there are incidents. And that's the nature of youth hubs. But we manage it, and our staff are trained to manage it, and we've beefed up our staff.
Are these librarians that are managing the youth? That's my question.
There are librarians as well as volunteers who help with tutoring.
The tutors and librarians. So I'm now asking, thank you very much for slipping back in. Sorry to put you on the spot. But we're looking at the 23 youth hubs, and I'm asking for those, if you've mapped, not where the youth hubs are from PFNR, but the youth outreach workers. Are there youth outreach workers through recreation in any of these 23 youth hub areas? And how do they connect in with the youth hub? If you don't know the answer, you can.
Yeah, through the chair, I would have to get back, and just for clarification, Councillor, are we talking the 23 youth hubs between the libraries and PFNRs?
Talking about their budget, their youth hubs, your youth outreach workers, not your youth hubs.
Understood. So we'd have to do some mapping around that, and I'd have to follow up with you on that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks very much. For council, that'd be great if you have that for me. Not for a question, just for information.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of this agencies? Okay, I just have a few just for the library. How many people access Toronto Public Libraries in a year?
On an average day, about 50,000 people access the library.
A day, a year, or a day? That's a day.
Per day.
Per day. So a year, you multiply that by?
17 million people.
Has that number been growing?
It's been relatively constant for the last few years.
Okay, and have you been able to keep up your service levels with this increase?
Our open hours per 100,000 per capita has been declining because the population in the city is growing so much. But our other service levels, we've kept up with. That's the one service level that's been declining.
And in this budget, you'll be able to keep up with your service levels?
Yes, except for the open hours.
Okay, and has the demand for weekend access, has that been increasing? I'm assuming it has.
People, Sundays are the weekends, I'm assuming. So yes, overall, a lot of people want Sunday service, and per hour, it's one of our busiest days.
Okay, so in this budget, there are increased hours for Sunday service?
We have eight additional branches with Sunday service.
So there's 8 in the budget, okay.
Which brings our total to 58 branches, which is more than half now.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions on these agencies? Okay, we're going to we'll just jump back to accountability officers. I know the lobbyist registrar and the ombudsman are now here. So why don't we have questions of the lobbyist registrar? I believe we did have.
Thank you very much.
And then for the ombudsman, I believe also after that.
The question is in relation to the new and enhanced requests that were made in the budget. What were they to accomplish?
The budget request was for 2 additional positions. One was for a position to support the registry team. Another was for a junior counsel to support the investigative unit. In short, the model is approaching a growth phase. It's been in place for over 10 years, and it has provided the transparency required to ensure there's integrity in government decision-making. In today's world driven by technology, where you have social media and multiple influences coming in through different platforms purporting to articulate facts and influence emotions and possibly shape public policy decisions, the fact that the city has such an advanced model in lobbyist regulation, a model, in fact, which is a marvel at a municipal level, not just in Canada, but in North America, stands to your credit. And what I would like to do is to assist council with my best advice into what we could use to forage through with certain other investments you've made, such as the recent transformation of the platform with improved technology, which has launched us to be able to be used by mobile devices and allow for open text searching, very much like the way people do business. So we're getting there. We have a case management system to assist our investigative unit, and we are moving forward with a new administrative monetary penalty system, which will be the first ever at the municipal level in Canada. So council has approved many initiatives which will enable us to continue forward. However, the investigative unit is the foundation upon which, and the legal advice and the support, the proactive advice that comes from that unit is what guarantees compliance and hence begets more registrations and has a model that actually works. So in tandem with the fact that business is ever more complex, both in the private sector and hence here at the city, in facilitating that relationship building and getting the objectives accomplished that you have before you at City Council, in order to ensure that our office can continue to assist with timely investigations and good service to lobbyists and members of the public, these two positions would be invaluable. Right now, our investigations unit is presented with the challenge of providing the advice to assist through legislative change, technological change, and providing upfront advice, which has been the cornerstone of our breach prevention program. And when you have resources directed to all that, it's difficult to do that without something being compromised. Our resources basically are being absorbed by supporting outreach and facilitating the model.
The administrative penalty system that you've spoken to, that'll be a first of its kind.
First of its kind in Canada.
And that would be if we find people are in, if the investigations unit finds that individuals aren't compliant with the lobbyist registrar, that they then would face a financial penalty?
Yes. Yes. So at the current time, the registrar has the power to impose bans. We have the power to take a matter to provincial prosecution. We will have, when the administrative monetary penalties comes in, another avenue where we may deal with a matter very similar to the way that the administrative monetary penalties are being used now at the city through parking tickets. So in a registry analysis, from a regulator's point of view, the principle is that let the offender bear the cost of regulation. And so it's just an easier way for us to be more responsive in laying an infraction when someone is late with their registration. It adds to our menu of enforcement power, is the bottom line.
The position, the support position, and the investigations unit, would those serve to advance that effort to move towards?
Yes, absolutely.
That's great. I'm going to have people come in and lobby me, and then I'm going to immediately report them to see if they haven't registered and see how much they have to pay. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yes.
Penalty.
The description.
Hold on, I think.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. The description for these new positions talks about meeting the statutory requirement for education and outreach. What is our statutory requirement if we're having a lobbyist registrar to provide the education and outreach to the community?
Well, education and outreach is fundamental to any regulatory model. So what you have under CODA and under the code is an obligation to maintain the registry and enforce its utility and make sure that it's working and make sure that the rules are being applied and compliance is being effected. You also have a statutory role in investigation, which is enumerated under the legislation. Education and outreach, it's not enumerated in the legislation. However, that is foundational to being successful. In other words, if the stakeholders don't understand their obligations, and they don't understand how the rules apply to them, and likewise, if we don't have the resources to work with city staff and councillor staff and councillors who are on the front line of receiving the communications so that you can all get to yes, that is, you receive the communications, the lobbyists have a plan, the transparency is affected to the registry, the code of conduct's being followed. That requires support and education tools. It requires us to write interpretation bulletins for best practice. And it requires us to take meetings both with public office holders and with lobbyists, with members of the public who may ask for clarification on what's on the registry. That's important too, because you don't want people writing articles per se, misinterpreting what's there. We want to help people get to the information that they're looking for. It gives credibility to how your model works, and an investment in that is an investment in reducing complaints, in reducing investigations that we have to do because we get front-end compliance.
Right. And to do the outreach that results in that, with the positions that you have now, do you have any time left to do the outreach to the community so that they even know that lobbyist registry is there for them, other than just having it on your website?
It's challenging. We've risen to the task of using social media and all the technology tools, but we've had to repurpose people that are on the registry in order to facilitate that and do that. So we've already used our due diligence in training staff with new skills, utilizing technology, doing things by web. But our vision is to work with the technology to get to an ultimate result. We're not trying to hold on to what we have. We want to grow because your business as a city is growing. We need to keep pace, and we need to make sure that those communications are being reflected accurately on the registry.
So the metric indicator in here shows that you have, not only is the job becoming more complex, but you actually have literally more demand. There are more numbers of people you need to track. You have growth here, and the number of communications necessary out has, it looks like almost tripled. So you just plain can't go on with the number of positions, and you have 8 FTEs. How long have you had those? That's been your
10 years.
That's been your complement for 10 years, and in that time, from 2010 to now, well, the growth on page 11 of the notes is bananas.
But it's a credit to the collaboration that the stakeholders have provided with our office and in utilizing the model. That is the front end of the city redirecting people, and our office redirecting people to do the right thing.
Right.
So it's the model is entrenched in how we do business here.
Okay, thank you so much. That clarifies it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on, you were around.
Questions? I think we have questions of the Ombudsman.
Yes.
Councillor Layton to begin. Actually, why don't we just go to outside councillors? We haven't been following the practice so far today, so why don't we do that? We'll go to outside councillors first. We actually put them on hold because a few of them weren't in the room at the time, so we're coming back to that. This will be the last questioning of the day. Councillor Fletcher.
Also, you varied your operation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just asking, Madame Ombudsman, what basis that you've put this in for a couple of years, but what's your urgent need for more staff, please?
The urgent need is simply, without more people, we cannot keep up with the volume of complaints. The volume of complaints has increased by 41% over the last 3 years, and our staff complement of 12 FTEs, including myself, has been static since 2015. We have had to reduce our service standards. I have a staff who is working as hard as they possibly can. Through you, Mr. Chair, as you mentioned, Councillor Fletcher, I have made a request 3 years running, Basically, the first year I got here, I proposed a reduction because that's what I was told was expected of me, and I thought I would take stock of the needs of the office and then come back to budget. For 3 years running, I have made a very modest but absolutely essential request for my office to have 2 new people to deal with the public. I'm looking for 1 complaints analyst. Those are the people who are at the front lines, who do the intake of complaints, and 1 investigator, which are the people who actually do the work on the more complex cases, be they complaints, be they consultations with city staff, be they requests that city councillors bring to us to look into something. I had a call yesterday as an example of one of those. Last year, council passed a motion that I should get the enhancement, but that I should get it from TCHC. And city manager's office came back and said that that was not appropriate as a matter of the independence of my office. So I'm back again. It's really, I just have to say, it's very difficult to maintain motivation of my staff and of myself when, as an independent officer, I come to council year after year and tell you, at minimum, what I need to fulfill my mandate and get nowhere.
So I just want to go back to that 41% increases in people in touch with you or complaints, ones that would need a follow-up. So just for an example, if people may call and it might not be a complaint that you can deal with, or it could be something that could be handled quickly. Of that 41%, could you give us an idea how many of those would be substantial, that they required this look at what broke down? Because your office very much is looking at where things are breaking down on behalf of the public in our city systems, right? And agencies and boards and commissions.
The 41% through you, Mr. Chair, the 41% increase is in complaints. So those are members of the public who are contacting us because they believe that they've been unfairly treated in receiving a city service. As Councillor Fletcher, you've pointed out, in some cases, they have come to us too early because they haven't been able to figure out the city's complaints processes, and we send them back. In some cases, they've come to the wrong place, and we send them elsewhere. But each one of those members of the public needs to be responded to and assisted. Of that number of complaints, I don't have the number handy, but certainly the vast majority end up in what we call an inquiry, which requires us to look into the problem, to contact city staff, to review documents, et cetera, make recommendations for improved processes.
So we only really see the big reports that come forward when there's been a large investigation, but you have a whole series of, I'm just going to call them fixes in there. You do report out to us where systems need repair, but not as clearly as when you have a big investigation. Am I right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the work of any ombudsman takes place mostly behind the scenes, if I can put it that way. I believe in a model which is less about public reports and certainly never about shaming or blaming anyone, but rather about working constructively to make the city, help the city serve people better. And every year in my annual report, we have testimonials, not just from members of the public, but from senior city staff, from city councillors, about the positive impact that all that work that my staff is doing this year on over 2,500 complaints from the public, the positive impact it's having.
Thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
So it strikes me, I went looking for the growth numbers, and you've been asking for this for a few years now, and someone keeps moving a motion to say, nope, no increase for you. But it strikes me that perhaps one of the challenges is it is up to us, not staff, because you're an independent officer. If you were to have actual service levels, we'd have to set them, like around this table. We can't say to staff, what's the service level for an accountability officer? We just expect you to take all of the calls, triage them, and investigate all of the ones that you think need to be investigated. That's our service level, is just do it all.
That's your expectation, but also that's my expectation as an independent officer, because that's my legal mandate. That's what's required of me and my staff. We can't say, you know what, we don't have enough people, we can't
Right.
speak to you.
Right.
So there is no choice.
But in any inside, non-independent, in any corporate division, if they had a growth of caseload of 43.3%, as it says here on page 10 of the notes, we would either increase the staff because we have a service level expectation, or we would actually adjust downward your service level and say, don't do as much. We haven't done that. In 43.3% of growth, we've continued to have the same level. Please do it all. Take all the calls, and any one of them that warrants investigation, investigate, please. That's our instruction to you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's my mandate, that there's no other option.
Okay, that's clear to me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, any other questions on the accountability officers? Okay. Next, we are now into the speaking and moving motions and making decisions. I'm going to begin. Actually, first of all, outside councilors to speak. Any outside councilors wish to speak? I'm looking at the one in the room here.
I'm just going to speak, and I'm not on the Budget Committee, but first I just want to thank all the members of council, including in this reduced council, for the amount of time and attention that they spend on the Budget Committee, because our jobs are much greater. And to you, Mr. Chair, for I think you said 6 years now that you've done this. And I can't imagine the time commitment that everybody gives here, including all of your public consultations. So I'll thank you, and then the staff. And I'll just quickly say my 2 areas of interest here are ensuring that with any money around eviction prevention, that we are adding renovictions and making sure we're wisely using staff to meet what's the newest trend, which is buying buildings and throwing everybody out of them. And it's happening, or buying houses and throwing people out, because that is really having a severe impact on being able to afford affordable housing. And we can't hardly keep up with the number of people that are being evicted. We can't build housing as fast as people are now being rent-evicted out of their places that they've lived for quite a long time. And the second, I just want to ask you to reconsider the Ombudsman's request, because it has been 3 years. That was my motion that she referred to about taking it out of the TCC budget, which was inappropriate apparently. And I apologize for that. You can't direct in that way, but I do know that her caseload is very heavy, and I do think it's such an important feature for us to be able to continuously improve the service that the public gets from our great staff at the city or our great staff at agencies, and to be able to review trends and to be able to adjust. So I know it's not recommended here, but that is, I'm not able to move any motions, but I'm just suggesting that that's one cut that, or removal, that I think isn't as well thought out as it could be, Mr. Chair. That would be my request. And to thank you for the support for all the 30,000 visits that we get to the food bank, and trying to create positive food experience and develop things for the people that are quite poor still in a gentrifying neighborhood in the East End for the food hub. And to thank Councillor Bradford, because many of his constituents also go there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll take it into committee. I'm going to speak first. I do have a series of motions that have been circulated on pink paper, so we will, if we'll have the clerk's indulgence, to begin going through them. The first is motion A. I'm not going to read it. There's a lot there, but we'll go down that. These are primarily additions to the budget. that'd be pretty quick, but. And the next will be motion B. These are just technical motions in nature that staff have asked me to move. First one has to do with the operating budget for shelter support and housing administration. It's a net zero. The next, motion C, is Toronto Public Health. Motion D is the establishment of a 2020 operating budget for Human Services Integration Office that staff have asked me to move. Motion E is the Office of the Controller and the Office of the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer. Again, staff have requested this be moved. Motion F, the Executive Director, Social Development, Finance and Administration report to Council with a responsible emergency funding plan for the Cabbagetown Youth Centre. Motion G, that Council direct the confidential information contained in the confidential attachment 1 to the report, September 10, 2019, from the Chief Executive Officer, Creatio, remain confidential in its entirety as it deals with personnel matters about identifiable persons and labor relations. And number 2, that City Council direct that the confidential information contained in confidential attachment 1 to the report, September 19, 2019, from the Medical Officer of Health, remain confidential in its entirety as it relates to personal matters about identifiable individuals, including municipal or local board employees and labor relations or employee negotiations. So I'll be moving those. First of all, I do want to thank staff all across the system for the weeks and if not months of work that has been happening behind the scenes that I don't think, I mean, I even sometimes find it hard to grasp the amount of work that happens behind the scenes. So I want to thank all the staff all across the city. I also want to thank all of the public who came out. Hundreds of people came out for discussions with all of the budget committee members and other councillors across the city. And again, I want to thank them. They're an incredibly important part of the process, and I want to thank them for coming out. And of course, to all the budget committee members and councillors who came to this process over the last, I believe, 40 or 42 days. For your work and commitment. You really get to understand how a city works when you see how the dollars are spent. So I just want to thank you for the work that you've been doing on behalf of the city. As I said prior, my focus as the budget chair and the budget chief for the city over the last 6 years is to keep taxes as low as possible, to be able to manage your money well, and through that finding efficiencies, looking for every opportunity to save money, modernization, reorganization, doing things differently. And we've been very successful at that over the last 5 years. Over $890 million in savings we have found over the last 5 years within these budgets that you see before us. In this year's budget alone, over $100 million in efficiencies and savings. What's also incredibly important to me is that we are fiscally responsible and prudent as a city, and I think we have recognized that and shown that through this budget. We need to keep our reserves healthy and strong, and I think they are healthy and strong. We actually have made investments into our reserves at this point in the process where we have not necessarily done in years past. So I'm glad that we're continuing to do investments into our reserves. When you look at our investment board, this is a new board that we formed a couple of years ago. It gives us a little, we went to the province, we had to get permission to really change how we invested. Not a lot of risk, but in doing that, in managing the $5 billion in reserves. This year we have in our budget over $70 million more than we did this year than we did last year, just through prudent, responsible investing of the reserves. We have been managing and trying to look at how we manage our capital much better, and I think you have seen through the work of the CFO and their team how we're starting to look at not reimagining, but looking at our capital plan and reinvesting. We have done increased investments in state of good repair all across the system in this budget. The other focus that and I guess philosophy that I work with regard to my role is I want to move the city forward with investments in key areas, and again, protecting all existing services and having enhancements. This budget does that. We have saved and we have protected all existing services and their enhancements. Over $70 million if this budget is approved in Toronto community housing. We are building, and we will continue to build more affordable housing. There's more for the environment in this budget. There's more police officers, more TTC operators, and more paramedics. When you look at transit alone, this budget is the most significant investment in upgrading our transit system in the city's history. Our 2029 capital plan is $11.9 billion for the TTC, almost double the capital plan that we had last year. We have extended the city building fund, and in that, we're going to be able to build new subways, signal systems, new buses, and streetcars. This is a good, responsible budget, and again, I want to thank everybody who has had the opportunity to be part of this, and thank you. Councillor Bradford, I think you were next for... Oh, questions, sorry.
I think I can probably guess the answer to this, but I'm gonna ask it anyhow. Would you consider a friendly amendment to Table 3 of Motion 1C that restores the money to and staff positions to the accountability officers, and instead fund those by an increased reduction from the MLTT contribution to the tax stabilization reserve?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. And I guess with the greatest of respect for you, and of course the accountability officers, I will stick with my motion. There will be opportunities through executive and through council to do changes to this, but at this point, I'm comfortable with what I have moved. Okay, Councillor Bradford, then Nunziata, and I guess Councillor Layton will be after that. So, Councillor Bradford.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I have two motions to move. We'll put the first one on the screen. This is formalizing the direction to report back on the vacant home tax. I think that there's been a lot of really productive discussion about that. We saw some of that in the briefing notes. But what that underscores to me is that we really do need a Made in Toronto solution and something to get it right for our city. And that's why we need to look at all of these things outlined in the motion here, how we're defining vacancy, how we're going to collect the tax, how we're going to upgrade our technology so that we can actually get smarter about how we're collecting the revenue. You know, for me personally, to my mind, this is much less about the revenue side, and it's really more intended to drive a policy outcome, which is to introduce more rental supply in a city that frankly desperately needs it. In this case, you know, I think it's a smart direction to go in because this is existing supply that is currently built. It currently exists and it's there, and we're just providing the incentive to introduce that so that can be absorbed in the market. So I want to understand that fully, and I'd like this information to come back. I appreciate in the comments we heard from the CFO, this will take some time, but it is something that's important and something I want to see move forward. I'd also like to acknowledge Councillor Cressy and Deputy Mayor Anna Bailau for their work on this. Deputy Mayor brought this forward last term of council, and we're getting closer to the decision point. The second motion is something I've discussed with park staff, and it responds to some of the correspondence we've received from the Toronto Skateboard Committee, which was founded in Beaches, East York by former Councillor Janet Davis. I think she's watching right now. Hey, Janet. And I think that, you know, this recognizes that construction costs across the industry are increasing, particularly with respect to concrete. The Toronto Skateboard Committee is plugged in on that, and so we're just asking staff to take a look at the numbers that they have allocated and report back through 2021 budget process when any adjustments that are needed. Like our budget chair, I would like to thank everyone who's been involved in preparing these budgets. It is a ton of time and a ton of energy on the committee side, but even more so on the staff side. Tweaking these budgets really does come at the margins in this committee, here at council, but we know that the hard work is happening behind the scenes with the staff, making sure that our programs keep running, we're maintaining funding, we're increasing services where possible, and we're making sure that the fundamentals of the city of Toronto are being delivered. This was a unique year, an exciting opportunity in my mind to work with the City Building Fund, and I would like to, you know, tip the cap to the mayor and our budget chief for their leadership on that and steering it through this process. When it comes to affordable housing and transit investment, we know we need to do more, and this is a response to that. I will say that in a city as complex as Toronto, we are always going to have more needs than we alone are going to be able to pay for. I think that that's actually a result of our ambition as a city, but we're not going to be able to meet those ambitions until we have alignment across all levels of government. And Toronto, the city of Toronto, our colleagues here, we do a lot of heavy lifting for the entire GTHA, for the province and for the feds. And so you see that in the deputations all the time. Residents talking about things that they want us to address, like gun violence. Well, there's a bit of a jurisdictional nightmare. And the mayor's announcement yesterday showed a major step in doing that, but we're not going to be able to tackle the root causes of violence unless we have governments that really can do something about inequality in the city. So we all need to work together on that. Transit expansion is the same story, politically sensitive subject, but we actually need collaborative partners in the provincial and federal governments who can raise debt and fund these million-dollar projects and make Toronto a priority. And I think if you, when we talk about housing, you look at briefing note 40, if you haven't already, the last 5 years, the city of Toronto has brought $1.2 billion to the table to develop new affordable housing. The province in the last 10 years has brought 193 million. That's including the operating. So there is a huge discrepancy there. And frankly, that's just not sustainable. So the budget decisions that we made this year, including the 23.4 billion city building fund, puts us in a strong position to be at the negotiating table, identifies our priorities, and now it's time to turn the screws on these partners and make sure that they're stepping up in a big way as well. I'll close in just saying I really do enjoy my time on the Budget Committee, particularly the opportunities to connect with residents. I did the tour this year. I was in Scarborough. Always have a great time out there. North York was pretty good too. And it is an opportunity to really hear from residents about what's important to them. Appreciated the East York Town Hall we did with Councillor Fletcher as well. This is an important part of the process, the formal and informal, those conversations at the doors, at diners, makes a big difference, and it keeps us close to Torontonians. So thanks everyone for your work on this, and hope you can support the motions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nunziata, then, oh, you have a question of the mover?
Yes. Thank you very much. On your motion, I guess it's A. Yeah, A. Have you, so with the report coming out, do you know if any of this is currently being covered by the consultant's report? I think I agree with the intent of it. I just want to make sure we're not adding work that might delay the report coming back or change the parameters of a report.
The intention is not to delay the report coming.
Did you confirm with the CFO that this was stuff that was covered or being covered in the consultant's report that was coming back?
My understanding is this is the intention of the report is to cover this material.
Okay,
and
great.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Nunziata to speak.
Yes, just briefly. So I do have a motion. Put it on the screen. City Council requests the provincial and federal government to commit to increase funding for child care subsidies and spaces in Toronto in their upcoming budgets. And as well, City Council conveyed to the provincial and federal governments that the City of Toronto is committed to funding 20% of the combined support for childcare by those governments, and the importance of an accessible and affordable childcare system for the economic and social health of Toronto, and that childcare is the responsibility of all three levels of government. So that's my motion. So I want to thank the staff and the Budget Committee as well. We did Councillor Layton and Councillor Crawford. We did Toronto and we did Etobicoke. And I know this was the first time Councillor Layton and Crawford did come to Etobicoke. They found their way there.
Sort of.
They found, no, for the first time in the, and unfortunately we didn't have coffee. But now you could see why we're building a new civic center, right? Well deserving. So thank you. I also want to thank the mayor's announcement yesterday for the $6 million in funding for youth and crime services. Youth and community violence prevention and intervention is really a priority for me in my ward. I've there's been a lot of challenges for me in my ward in the past year, and I've been working with the local youth groups, and I mean, I'm hosting a job fair next week for the youth at the Falstaff community, and I'm pleased as well in the budget is for 2 youth hubs in my ward and youth spaces. So I know that unfortunately we can't fund and add to all the requests that we heard from the deputants, but I feel that what we've added in the budget and what's before us, as Councillor Crawford indicated, it's a balanced budget, and I think that we've added money into the budget to add some of these services back into the budget. And I'm happy with the way the budget is, and that how we've increased it to identify the needs of certain parts of the city. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. I have some motions, less than I had last week, I think. Partly, well, because most of them are covered off in the report, and I'll get to the 2 that aren't here at all in a second. The first one that City Council requests the Director of, there's a revised copy, the CFO and Treasurer and the Director of Energy and the Environment to include in the report to City Council on Transform TO implementation in the second quarter of 2020, funding options for immediate implementation. Number 2 is the fleet services motion that I believe is actually covered off in Councillor Crawford's motion. So I believe it'll be out of order. A motion that City Council authorize the Deputy City Manager of Community and Social Services to establish the Housing Commissioner's Office in 2020 with a budget of up to $750,000 gross and 0 net, and 4 full-time equivalent positions funded from the Social Housing Stabilization Reserve Fund as one-time in-year budget adjustment to the 2020 approved operating budget of the Housing Secretariat, and to include the ongoing costs for the Housing Commissioner's Office beginning in 2021 through the annual budget process. I believe motion D is also now, it was the Parks, Forestry, and Recreation ravine funding, which is now a duplicate. Motion E, that City Council requests the City Manager in consultation with the Chief Executive Officer of the TTC to report back to City Council on a long-term strategy to reduce the share of the Toronto Transit Commission's operating budget covered by fares to be no more than 50% of the overall cost. F, that City Council requests the General Manager of Transportation Services to include sufficient funding as part of the 2021 capital budget process to maintain the cycling infrastructure budget at a level of at least $16 million annually. The City Council urged the federal government through Infrastructure Canada to allocate new funding for municipalities for urban cycling infrastructure in order to improve safety and support Canada's climate change commitments. G, this is a long one, but essentially it's to get support for a report to come back on reinstating the personal vehicle tax. H, and so I hadn't seen Councillor Bradford's motion before this, but this is the Budget Committee advised the Executive Committee that it supports a vacant home tax at a rate that will motivate property owners to sell and rent out their vacant homes, to be implemented as soon as possible, subject to consideration of the forthcoming report requested in item EX 10.7. Let me first just say, and I'll get to some of these motions in a second if I have time, I have one more, and that's a motion, it's a local motion on the allocation of Section 37 for the Huron Street Public School, and there's a shared use agreement with the TDSB involved in that. Let me just say congratulations to the CFO and to the financial planning staff on bringing forward what is a major shift in the way that the city does its budgets. I think there were probably some learning experiences along the way, but it was a monumental effort that you've gone through. So kudos to you. I also wanted to thank the community at large and the public for getting involved. Every time we start this process, there's jockeying about what's not in the budget, where we should be making additional investments. And there's a lot of individuals and organizations that spend a lot of time reaching out, a lot of their personal time, reaching out, trying to help shape the budget. We get a lot of emails, we get a lot of requests for meetings, we host a lot of meetings with them. And it has results. Every year we see changes, and Councillor Bradford mentioned it's mostly at the margins, and it is. We're not shifting billions upon billions of the $13 billion budget because of a couple phone calls. But at the same time, it is making a difference. The mayor has, and this hasn't happened in the past, the mayor has made adjustments to the budget mid-budget process and demonstrated his support. And to be honest, that made life a whole lot easier on me and probably on a lot of individuals that were fighting to change the budget, because first we weren't on pins and needles for 3 more weeks or however long it is between now and our special council meeting. But it allowed us to focus our attention on other things and other changes in the budget we wanted to see. So kudos to the community and public for their involvement. If we've had a lot of, we've tried to frame a lot of budgets in certain ways. There was a budget a couple years ago where we kind of borrowed money from ourselves. We called that the shell game budget. There's been some treading water budgets in the past. Like, we go through a little branding exercise every time to find out what sticks, right? I think, though, this one is the first budget that we will feel the full impacts of Premier Ford's move to download services under the City of Toronto. $15 million to cut from childcare that we heard we would have to cover. There's some one-time funding there, as there is in public health, but we're going to spend the next 6 months having to advocate for that day in and day out, spending resources on fighting with the provincial government so that they keep up their end of the bargain. And what's going to happen if those investments aren't made in childcare? The expansion we're doing, those childcare centers are in danger of failing. Financial collapse, because we're not associating, and we don't have enough subsidies to go to those centers to make them viable in the communities that are sorely underserved with childcare in the city. And public health is the same thing. Who would think about cutting public health in the last 3 weeks? Hands up. Who here would say public health, that's kind of a nice to have, one of those sort of things? Yeah, no hands are going up. But 6 months from now, when the province hasn't changed their mind, we're going to be fighting for it again. And if there's not an international crisis, a public health crisis, it's going to be that much harder. So we have to be vigilant with this, or budgets are going to get worse, and it's going to be harder and harder to cover them. Federal government's the same, right? We're putting in all this extra money to fight violence and poverty reduction, but they're on hold on some key announcements. There's a $75 million hole in our budget because of pressure that's been put on our city that we'll take. Like, to be honest, I don't want us to scapegoat anyone. We're going to take this, and we're going to work as hard as we can to serve those new Canadians and everyone experiencing homelessness. But we're not getting the resource we need from the other levels of government. So what do? We got to look for other sources of revenue, people. Like, we've been saying that for years, sometimes been vilified for sticking our neck outs, but we have to look for, and not just a couple million here. I support a vacant home tax too, but it's not, the point isn't money coming in the door. We have to look for hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. And it's going to start with using the tools we have. There's not many of them. And then it's going to take a sustained efforts for us to fight and mobilize support in our communities for the larger tools that we need for the future prosperity. Very quickly, I'll go through. We need to fund Transform TO. We can't wait until July of 2021 to get boots on the ground. The Housing Secretariat, we just passed the motion to make housing a human right. We've come up with a way to say, don't put all the money in, but use a reserve to draw some of the money if necessary. When staff are ready to figure out where it's housed, they need to put that into effect. The mayor's funding ravines, which is fantastic. The TTC, our fares keep going up, our service isn't keeping pace. We need to deliver better services, and it needs to be more affordable. So I think we should have a goal at 50%. It's slightly arbitrary, I get it, but I thought it was an important point to make. On transportation services, if PTIF doesn't continue, our cycling budget gets cut in half as of 2021. 16 million to 8 million. We need PTIF We need the PTIF funding to continue. And we need a strategy if the feds aren't going to do it. And then I have the vehicle registration tax and the vacant home tax that sends a message to the executive committee that we think we should undertake those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Next is Councillor Carroll, and then
Okay. I'm moving an amendment to your motion, Mr. Chair, that Councillor Crawford's motion 1A be amended so that the 4 positions highlighted in Table 3, that being the Accountability Office requests, be funded from the Tax Stabilization Reserve for an amount of $369,100. Very small amount. We're making a draw on that reserve of over $5 million. We're making a change to the budget of almost $7.8 million. This is a very small amount, and it's coming out of what is a good news story that we have added to the reserve this year. I've long been advocating that we should have a long time ago committed ourselves not to be addicted to municipal land transfer tax fund being the thing we use to balance the operating budget, that we needed to look for new sources of revenue. But what's happening now is we're shifting MLTT there. We're also setting ourselves a special levy. We've got a lot of focus on capital and pushing things to capital, and that's great. We have big projects to do. And it's lovely when you can cut a ribbon on a big project and show it to people. But our pressure remains operating, which is why we have to look at new streams of revenue. And I know that people don't want to talk about the ones that we don't have permission from the province. But here we are in a year where we're about to reach 3 million. And I will say it again, when we do, when they announce that there are 3 million people in the city of Toronto, we will then be the only municipality in the world with a population of 3 million or more that has no access to either a sales tax or an income tax collected by payroll or both. The only major city in the world. That's what happens. That's what we can celebrate on the day of 3 million. So we have to keep talking about it and hope that other governments that can provide the permission to do so hear it. And we should be talking to other municipalities about it too, but we don't belong to their association, so we can only talk to them at the federal thing. The budget itself, there are the great news stories in here. Adding to the CBF is a great news story, something that we've all looked for a long time. Recasting the capital is a great news story. What it makes possible in transit and housing on the capital side is great. But we are still very tight in operating. We've had to, while we had a commitment to add 30 million more to MLTT for a total of 70, we've pulled back and filled some holes. And it's wonderful to spend money on youth. We're still waiting for the youth services review. I'd prefer to be more strategic, but if we open these centers as announced yesterday and don't play around with it, then we aren't going so far as to not have any future dollars left to do whatever that youth services review might recommend. So I'm just going to say thank you for opening them and wait to see what happens. Because the ultimate goal for me, the ultimate efficacy of a youth center is if a child knows that if the community center is open, that space is open too. That's the dream. And we're not actually even working on that dream. We don't have an official strategy to work on that dream. And so I'm prepared to wait until the youth services review arrives, but I will bet you dollars to donuts that that's what it's going to say. And I've known that since a youth died, shaking the locked door on Parkway Forest Community Center, hoping he might be able to get in to where the youth space was, and he was shot in the back doing so. He knew where to go, but it wasn't going to be open when he got there. The back door of the center was locked because while it was open for the people in the running track in the front door, the youth space was already closed, and for security reasons, let's start locking down. So the dream really needs to be looked at in a policy way in committee. Same goes for library hubs. The reason open hours is if you have 30 kids in the youth center at 8 o'clock, we're saying to them, come on kids, out you go. Out you go. Go race around in the peanut because we're closing. Then you haven't got the Dream Youth Hub. You're not all the way there yet. So we have to work on that. But in the meantime, we have one thing here. For $369,000, not a lot when you consider you're already drawing over $5 million out of that reserve. We have to address the 10-year and 5-year needs in those accountability offices because no one else can. They're independent offices. The only people who can say they made any recommendation and failed those offices, which means we failed in our accountability and transparency, we can't blame staff. We can't say, oh, that's the staff recommended budget, because only we recommend on those budgets. And 3 years in a row now, we've said, thanks for sharing. No, you can't have anything. For 10 years, the budget has been static in the lobbyist registry, and we really ought to care about that one. And for 5 years in the ombuds. Well, you went a little over for Councillor Layton, so I'm just going to say, if you don't pass this, you have no one to blame but yourselves.
Thank you, Councillor. And I am giving a little bit of leeway for councillors recognizing. Okay. Last will be Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to start by thanking all the city staff that contributed to this budget, and in particular our CFO, who is really leading this initiative to modernize the budget. And I really did enjoy this process and was very satisfied with all the answers that I was given, and in particular with the briefing note request that I put forward in that additional information. So I'd just like to thank you for leading that process. I look forward to seeing how it continues to evolve over the next few years, should I be able to stay on Budget Committee with this great privilege that it is. I also want to thank Stephen Conforti and Councillor Crawford both for their hard work on this budget, but also for attending a town hall that was held out in my ward. And thank you for making that available across the city for the councillors that want that. And I found that that was very helpful to hear directly from the residents in my community, in addition to the ones that we heard from at both the Scarborough Council meeting and the North York Council meeting. There's three things that really I am very proud that we're doing in this budget, and that came from the staff recommendations coming forward. And the first is the expansion of Transform TO with the additional hires. They have a huge undertaking this year to report back in the spring on the plan for 2021 to 2023, but also on becoming net zero by 2050 and possibly by 2040. And so I'm very excited that we're making that big investment this year. In addition, something that is very near and dear to my heart and is in a large part the reason that I'm here is the investments that we're going to be making in public transit, and that additional $4.7 billion of the city building fund that is going towards much needed state of good repair, as well as additional vehicles, including 614 buses, because Scarborough is going to be on the bus for a very long time. Even though we are making the much needed investments in transit, those stops still won't be open for some time. And in addition, we continue to have challenges with the SRT that require, unfortunately, our residents to get off that transit and onto the bus. And the third is the investment in Toronto Police, and that's because residents have been telling me that they'd like to see more officers and a return to some of the numbers, and so the 188 net new is something that I'm very happy to see, and I know that the residents in my community in particular as well. But in addition to that, I want to thank Councillor Crawford for the amendment that he's bringing forward to the budget, and I'm very happy to support, because that really does reflect what we heard through the community consultation process. And at that, we heard about the importance of investing in these youth violence prevention programs and the youth hubs. And at the Scarborough Civic Centre, we heard particularly from three youth from Danzig, and they spoke about the hub they used to have in Danzig and how wonderful it was. And it was open in response to a very unfortunate incident and death of several young people in the community. And we opened the hub, and things got better, and we closed the hub. And unfortunately, last year, we had the death of a 17-year-old, which is extremely tragic. And it just shows that if we build these facilities, they have impact, and that the youth want those spaces and that they will use them. The additional investment in the youth hubs that we're seeing, I've attended events at the Malvern Youth Hub and was able to watch one group in particular that uses it, Wave Art, that did a storyboarding with youth and mentoring them in the arts. And I was able to watch their creative process from storyboarding all the way to an art exhibit that they launched last Friday at Scarborough Arts. So if we build these centers, they will use them, and they are having a huge impact. And I think that we have to not just look at numbers, but look at people and those individual stories, because they're incredibly powerful. So I'm really happy by the amendment that you're bringing forward today to invest additional funds in that. And in addition, the funds on the ravine strategy, because that's something else that we've been hearing about for a very long time. I continuously get emails about litter in our ravines and how neglected people feel that space is and how they want to see that revitalized. So I'm very excited by the investments to advance invasive species management, litter cleanup, and also potentially capital should that funding come forward from other levels of government. And I think we all have to continue to advocate for that capital investment that is much needed. And the last thing I'll say is I did ask specifically for some briefing notes on a few topics, and that's as a heads up that this is something where I think we need to be going next year, and you'll be seeing me continue to put pressure on that. And so the first was the briefing note that asked for the investments that we're making in green technology. And I think we now have that baseline, and we know how much we're investing. And if we really want to be successful in being net zero by 2050, and if we want to continue to be the leaders that I think we are, we need to be amplifying and transforming that industry so that we can be successful. The second was I asked for a briefing note about Vision Zero, and I think we're making great strides on that. We have, we're turning over the requests for mid-block crossings in Scarborough. We're starting to put them in. But if you look at the funding and the way it's distributed, I don't think that we're distributing it along with KPIs and the KSIs, killed and seriously injured. And that should be the metrics that is determining the funding, and it's not being distributed fairly in that. So I'd like to see that that starts to shift, and that we're also tracking the Vision Zero process and the metrics around that to show that our investments are working. And the final thing that I think we've really set baseline for next year is, and we're going to have a big report at the end of this year that will be important, is on net zero and moving towards net zero. And we asked for a briefing note that was talking about the new buildings that we are building. And if we truly want to be leaders and we want to encourage the private sector to go net zero, we need to lead by example. And so when we have new facilities that are opening in the next few years, we need to find a way to make those buildings net zero. And I have the perfect example in my community. I have a community center opening in 2023 in the area of Joyce Trimmer Park, and it's going to have a facility life that's well beyond 2050. So why are we going to build it and not go net zero now? I think we have to look at that investment very closely and make the additional investments, because there'll be a huge return on investment on that. So I just wanted to flag those three briefing notes specifically, because there was rationale for why I asked for them, even though I'm not making motions on it today, but you will expect to hear from me about that going forward through this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. We are now ready for voting. So we're going to begin with Councillor Carroll's motion 5, the amendment to my motion 1A. It's up on the screen. Recorded vote. All in favor?
On Councillor Carroll's amendment, all in favor. Councillor Carroll, Councillor Layton, all opposed. Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor McKelvey. The amendment does not carry.
Okay, next will be my motions 1A to G. Here's 1A.
Could I? Oh, we're gonna do them separately.
Yeah, we'll do them all separately.
Okay, great.
I don't know. Can we do? Yeah, we'll do them separately. It'll take a bit of time, but probably makes sense to do them separately. All in favor? 1A, which is a large motion, my first motion.
Sorry, that's motion A. Not, oh, 1A, there's something else on it now, sorry.
It's the whole.
Can we vote, and maybe this is a question of the clerk, can we vote on motion A1C separately?
Yes, we can.
No, I think that's the one.
Just give us a s-
The offset. The opposite of your motion.
Hold on one second.
I can break it down to columns, or to columns 1 and 2 only.
The clerk has informed me that we are not able to.
Easily.
Councillor Layton?
Utilization reserve. He's taking 5 million from capacity.
Councillor Layton, the clerk has informed me that we are not able to vote on it separately. And okay. Anyway, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion B. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion C. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion D. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion E. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion F. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion G. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Next will be Councillor Bradford, motion 2A. All in favor? That's the vacant property tax report. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion 2B, which is Parks, Park, and Recreation. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Next is Councillor Nunziata, motion 3. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. As my motion 1A passed, Councillor Layton's motion 4B, parts 1A and 2, and motion 4D are redundant. So we will begin with Councillor Layton's motion 4A. Which energy and environment, or environment and energy. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion 4B, part 1B and 3 only. So these are the two components that are not redundant, Councillor. It's not the entire one. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Motion 4C by Councillor Layton. I will have a recorded vote on that, please. All in favor?
On part C, all in favor, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Layton, all opposed, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor McKelvey, that does not carry.
Next is Councillor Layton's motion 4E. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Motion F. Councillor Layton, Transportation Services. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Motion G. Recorded vote, please. All in, okay.
On motion G, all in favor, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Layton, all opposed, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor McKelvey. That is a tie, so it does not carry. The vote is 3-3.
It's also probably the best that vote will ever do, so just highlighting it for you.
Okay, next is the motion H by Councillor Layton. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. And I think there's one more. Motion I, 4I by Councillor Layton. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Item as amended? Or do we?
Yes.
So item as amended. All in favor? Opposed? That carries.
To do item 3.
And we now have to do item 3. It's just a... been there for the last 3 weeks. It's just a procedural motion. We need, hold on. A wee bit of a delay at the moment, just have to, okay. The additional City of Toronto reporting requirement as a result of Ontario Regulation 286-09 Budget Matters Expenses. All in favor? Yes. Opposed? That's carried. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. The budget is over at the Budget Committee.